So I watched this video by this user Wayman29, and he was talking about how he had checked in um, to see what was going on in the so-called atheist community, and he listened to a podcast that was called The Drunken Peasants, which is TJ and Ben. And then I listened to it about Brett Keane, and he was talking about Brett Keane and how Brett Keane has an image problem and various reasons why, and how Brett Keane's trying the same thing over and over and it's not working, kind of a deal. So it turns out that one of the people on this podcast is TJ, aka the Amazing Atheist, which was interesting because it took me a while to realize that. I didn't really recognize the voice. Then I saw part of the podcast had a camera, and but I thought they were just looping TJ as ironic humor, but no, it really was TJ. But it was an interesting thing because the point of Wayman was just, about Brett Keane, who I guess is a theist. I couldn't figure out. I mean, he was an atheist when I first started, and then he's theist, and I thought he went back to atheist, but he's theist. But so the point was kind of trashing Brett Keane, which is an easy pastime. But uh, Brett Keane had brought an atheist ally to help argue against the black hole. And now, well, here's what I was going to get at is that what I find is when these, what I'll call YouTube atheists, argue science with, young earth creationists or theists, uh, they pat themselves on the back, and their faith in science is just so intense. It's funny because it just shows how little they understand. They make science look bad, basically. And so this atheist dude, for example, he said he was atheist, and then when he was talking about reasons not to believe in the Big Bang, um, Paul's ego or someone chimed in, because the Bible says something else. And the guy's like, I'm an atheist, so that argument doesn't really go against, what I'm trying to tell you. And what I'm just always struck by is that the YouTube atheists don't really understand science at all. I mean, for example, at one point somebody was saying, well, don't you think if there was something to what you were saying that scientists and people would be covering it? That's not how science works. I mean, the way science would work is right now we don't know that much. It's like you could call it jack shit. And so it's going to be different in the future. It's not like, but wouldn't somebody already be saying what we know in the future if what we know now is wrong? It's like that's not how it works. And they're lecturing theists and people, and they're satisfied because they believe in science, which is something they don't understand, more than people that don't believe in it. Um, and I'll just finish up with saying, for example, one time, I've worked in astronomy for over 20 years. I just finished a job over 10 years working with astronomers and astrophysicists, which is the same thing. Um, and I had asked one scientist, I said, well, what do you think? Do you think it's more accurate to say everywhere in the universe is at the center of the universe? Or do you think it's more accurate to say that the universe has no center? And he said, well, considering the geometric definition of center, we're all equidistant from the edge, so probably we're all in the center. But it's hard to say, and it might be semantic because, the edges aren't all the same for all of us. So, and then he said what he was really confused about is this question of the Big Bang, because if everything was concentrated in a tiny point, that would be a singularity. And according to a lot of our physics, there's no way to escape a singularity, a black hole. So how did that happen? And this is basically what the guy in this podcast, which I didn't listen to that much, I tried to skip around and whatnot, and I probably listened to an hour of it though. I mean, so that's a lot, but there were hours and hours of this podcast. I found the last one Brett Keane had been at, had taken part in, and I probably listened to a good half hour of that one, and at least, and a little 10 minutes here and there, skipping around. So, That's a pretty similar question, and it's pretty unanswered, and it's a lot of hand waving, a lot like the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics. It's just like, well, it's a hand wave. Why? Well, because you have to have some terminology to improve. You have to have some sort of framework, even if it's a little bit, and then this happens all of a sudden, collapse. What happens? How long does it take? Oh, well, don't know. You have to have some system like that in order to iteratively improve it, right? In order to get a better explanation, you need terminology with vague definitions so that you can put better definitions in and then go, oh, it's not like that at all. Let's use these three words, and then vague and definitions, and you improve them. That's how it works. That's the process. Identify a phenomena, name it, come up with a model, and then improve the model, and ultimately you might have to change the name as you realize, oh, I was looking here and it's really there. So, to summarize, what I notice when YouTube atheists try to lecture theists on science is that they're very dogmatic, they don't feel like they have to actually understand it, and they get it wrong. And the reason this is important is because what you really need to do, and what scientists themselves are actually doing, is trying to find out which part. It's like a point spread function. Okay, what is the shape of this? This thing spreads over the whole universe in principle, but really it's brighter here and then it gets dimmer. It has a shape, and that's a point spread function. This is stars. So the shape of a star, it's a point spread function. What is the spread? Yeah, maybe in principle the spread goes out forever. Everything's connected. But that doesn't mean it's equally everywhere. There is a shape to the intensity. So this is kind of how theories work. So in the case of the Big Bang, what we know is things look like they're expanding. Now, why would I say that? That's shorthand for the fact that the further away from Earth you get, the more you see a redshift. So since you're also looking further back in time, it looks like things were moving apart faster. And what we really then think from that is that the universe is expanding. Okay, that's different from inflation, the banging part, where in a split second, things went from a black hole to somehow as big as a universe. That's the hand waving part. What we really know is that everything in the universe has a redshift, and so everything looks like it's going apart. It could just be that it appears that way, but they have double checked and it looks like it's really happening. But all you really know is that everything appears like it's going apart. If you just use induction, then it's like, oh, well, at some point it was all together. But not necessarily. Everything could be going apart, falling in black holes, going back in time, coming in at the origin of time, and going apart. And existence never was at that origin point. That origin point is just a mathematical construct like superstring theory. So you have to be able to look at if you really want to argue it. I mean, I like arguing these issues with everybody, but if you really want to be competent arguing these kinds of theories, you need to understand, well, what is the part we've really seen, and what is the part we've deduced, and then what is the part that we've deduced based on assuming what we deduced before was correct. So a Big Bang going back, that goes way beyond the physics that we actually have good evidence for. Okay, that's in the realm of, well, let's put some terms so we can try to get better definitions in, and then we'll see how those definitions work. And, and then you can take some parts of a theory that might have a better explanation. You don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But to not do that, you have to understand which parts are reliable. So, a part that's reliable is all the stars in our universe, all the galaxies, let's say, actually, appear to be traveling away from each other, whatever direction you look. And you look at those two and they seem to be traveling away from each other. That's what the expansion means. That's the part that's really fucking reliable. To put that on a timeline and go back in time and say the universe is 14 billion years old, and it blew up at one point, Big Bang, That's a little speculative, right? Maybe the universe has always been something that looks 14 billion years old if you calculate it that way. So, anyway, it does make the YouTube type atheists, we could call it simpleton atheism, seem pretty dogmatic. It makes science look like a religion. And that's sad. But what you gonna do?